Morning light spreads slowly across a late summer meadow, warming the dense patchwork of flowers that feed one of the most complex societies in the insect world. Beneath the gentle hum of wings, inside a hollow tree or the narrow cavity of a wooden hive box, tens of thousands of honeybees move with precise coordination through a living architecture of wax. Every corridor and chamber within the hive serves a purpose. Nurseries filled with larvae, storage cells heavy with nectar and pollen, and narrow passageways where workers constantly exchange food, scent, and information. The colony functions not as a loose gathering of individuals, but as a single biological system, a superorganism whose survival depends on perfect cooperation. Yet as the warm months begin to fade and the long shadow of winter approaches, that cooperation begins to fracture in a quiet but unmistakable way. Throughout spring and summer, male honeybees, known as drones, live a remarkably privileged existence compared to their tireless sisters. While worker bees spend their lives collecting nectar, producing wax, feeding larvae, defending the hive, and regulating temperature through constant wing ventilation, drones perform none of these tasks. Their bodies are built for only one purpose: reproduction. Large eyes dominate their heads, specialized for spotting queens during mating flights high above the landscape. Their abdomens lack stingers, and their legs are poorly adapted for gathering pollen. Even their mouthparts are inefficient for feeding themselves. Instead, drones move slowly through the hive while workers share honey directly with them mouth to mouth, a process called trophallaxis that allows the colony to distribute energy precisely where it is needed. During the abundance of summer, this arrangement is sustainable. Flowering plants release waves of nectar across the landscape, and worker bees can harvest enough energy to support both the brood and the idle drones waiting for their brief chance to mate. But honeybee societies are governed by ruthless biological accounting. Every drop of nectar stored in wax cells represents survival during the cold months when flowers disappear entirely. As daylight shortens and temperatures begin to fall, the colony shifts its priorities from expansion to endurance. The workforce continues to gather nectar and seal it into thick stores of honey, but something subtle begins to change inside the hive. Worker bees start to withhold food from the drones. At first, the shift is almost invisible. Drones wander through the corridors expecting to be fed, extending their tongues toward passing workers, but the exchanges grow shorter and less frequent. Gradually, the workers begin to push drones aside as they attempt to access honey stores. What once looked like peaceful coexistence transforms into persistent harassment. Worker bees bite at the wings and legs of the males, tugging them away from food sources and shoving them toward the entrance of the hive. The behavior spreads through the colony like a coordinated decision, even though no single bee commands it. Thousands of workers independently follow the same biological instructions encoded by evolution. Eventually, the eviction begins. At the hive entrance, drones attempting to return inside are blocked by worker guards. Some are dragged bodily across the wooden threshold, their legs scraping the surface as workers grip them with their mandibles. Others are bitten repeatedly until they stumble away from the entrance entirely. Outside the hive, the expelled males cluster briefly on nearby surfaces, disoriented and weak from hunger. Unlike worker bees, drones cannot gather nectar for themselves. Their anatomy and instincts were never meant to support independence. Within hours or days, most will die from starvation or exposure. This brutal event, often called the drone eviction, unfolds in nearly every honeybee colony across temperate regions of the world as autumn approaches. To human observers, it can appear shockingly harsh, but within the ecological logic of the hive, it is simply survival mathematics. Drones represent a genetic investment only useful during the reproductive season. Once the opportunity for mating has passed, every gram of honey they consume threatens the survival of the colony that must endure months without new food sources. By removing the drones, worker bees reduce energy consumption and concentrate resources on the queen and the winter generation of workers that will maintain the hive until spring. Underlying this rejection is an even deeper biological mechanism that governs belonging inside the hive: scent. Every honeybee colony shares a unique chemical identity created by pheromones and environmental odors absorbed through constant contact. Worker bees recognize their nestmates through this colony odor, a constantly updated chemical signature that coats every individual. When a bee approaches the entrance, guard workers inspect her with sensitive antennae, sampling the invisible blend of hydrocarbons and pheromones on her body. If the scent matches the colony's identity, she is allowed to pass. If it does not, she is treated as an intruder. This chemical system means that membership in the colony is never permanent. Injury, illness, or even extended time away from the hive can alter a bee's scent profile enough to trigger rejection. In extreme cases, workers may attack individuals that no longer match the colony odor, removing them in the same way they expel the drones. The hive does not recognize individuals as personalities or companions. It recognizes only chemical signals and functional roles. Seen from inside the dark corridors of wax, the eviction of drones is not cruelty. It is a survival strategy refined over millions of years, ensuring that the colony, an organism far larger than any single bee, has the resources it needs to endure the most unforgiving season of the year. In the quiet, cooling air outside the hive, the rejected drones crawl weakly through the grass, while inside, thousands of workers continue sealing honey into cells, preparing for a winter that will test every stored drop of energy. Beneath the dense canopy of a tropical forest, the ground appears alive with movement. Long columns of ants stream across fallen branches and exposed roots, each worker carrying a fragment of green leaf balanced above its body like a sail catching invisible wind. From a distance, the procession resembles a slow river of vegetation, flowing back toward a hidden destination. Yet the leaves themselves are not food. The true meal lies far underground, inside one of the most extraordinary agricultural systems in the natural world. The colony of a leafcutter ant can extend several meters below the forest floor, a labyrinth of chambers connected by carefully maintained tunnels. Within these chambers lies the colony's most valuable resource, a living fungal garden. Workers chew the collected leaf fragments into a moist pulp and arrange the material into spongy platforms where a specialized fungus grows. The ants feed on swollen structures produced by the fungus, rich with nutrients that the leaves alone could never provide. Over millions of years of evolution, the ants and the fungus have become inseparable partners. The insects cultivate the fungus, and the fungus transforms plant matter into digestible food. The entire society depends on the stability of this delicate agricultural relationship. Inside the nest, workers move constantly through the gardens, pruning fungal strands, removing debris, and adding fresh plant substrate delivered from the surface. The air within these chambers is warm and humid, conditions carefully regulated by ventilation shafts that allow carbon dioxide and heat to escape. The colony's survival depends not only on maintaining food production, but also on protecting the fungal crop from contamination. In a dark, crowded environment filled with organic material, harmful microbes can spread quickly. A single invasive fungus or bacterium could destroy the garden and starve the colony. To guard against this threat, leafcutter ants maintain one of the most advanced sanitation systems known in the insect world. Workers constantly groom themselves and each other, scraping their bodies with specialized comb-like structures on their legs. These grooming rituals remove spores and particles that might otherwise enter the garden chambers. Even more remarkably, many leafcutter ants carry symbiotic bacteria on the surface of their bodies. These bacteria produce natural antibiotics that help suppress dangerous fungal invaders, creating a microscopic defensive shield around the ants themselves. Despite these defenses, contamination still occurs. Workers traveling through the forest encounter countless microorganisms clinging to leaves, soil, and decaying wood. When a forager returns to the nest, she may unknowingly carry spores capable of infecting the colony's fungal crop. At this point, the colony faces a difficult problem. The worker herself is still a valuable member of the workforce, but whatever she carries could threaten the entire agricultural system. Instead of immediate expulsion, the colony often responds with something more subtle and structured: quarantine. As contaminated material accumulates, certain workers begin transporting waste away from the fungal gardens towards specialized refuse chambers located at the outer edges of the nest. These chambers contain discarded plant pulp, dead ants, and fragments of infected fungus removed from the gardens. The atmosphere here is dramatically different from the carefully maintained inner chambers. Waste piles grow warm as microbes break down organic material, creating an environment filled with spores and bacteria. Workers assigned to these refuse zones rarely return to the clean interior of the nest. At first glance, the ants performing this task appear similar to other workers, but their role effectively isolates them from the rest of the colony. Individuals that handle waste become coated with microbes and chemical signals associated with contamination. Other ants respond to these cues by limiting contact with them. Instead of circulating freely through the nest, refuse workers remain near the colony's margins, transporting debris outward through tunnels that lead to surface dumps or sealed waste chambers. Their world becomes a biological buffer zone between the sterile fungal gardens and the chaotic microbial environment outside. Researchers studying these colonies have observed that ants performing refuse duties often live shorter lives than those working inside the nest. Exposure to harmful microbes increases the risk of infection, and the isolation from the main workforce reduces the chances of returning to safer tasks. In effect, these individuals occupy a form of social demotion. They are not expelled outright like the drones of a honeybee colony, but their role shifts permanently toward the colony's most dangerous and contaminated work. This separation functions as a powerful disease management system. By concentrating waste handling among a specific group of workers, the colony reduces the risk that pathogens will spread into the fungal gardens. The strategy mirrors quarantine systems used by much larger organisms, including human societies. Instead of treating every worker as interchangeable, the colony organizes labor in ways that limit contact between clean and contaminated environments. Chemical communication plays a central role in maintaining these invisible boundaries. Ants constantly exchange information through pheromones and cuticular hydrocarbons coating their bodies. When a worker becomes associated with refuse or infected material, her chemical profile subtly changes. Other ants detect these shifts with their antennae, adjusting their behavior accordingly. The result is a dynamic network of interactions where proximity, contact, and task assignment respond continuously to microbial risk. Above ground, the leafcutter columns continue their steady harvest, cutting fresh vegetation and transporting it into the underground farms. Beneath the soil, the fungal gardens grow in quiet darkness, sustained by the labor of thousands of workers who rarely encounter the dangerous edges of their society. And farther out, near the refuse tunnels where waste slowly decomposes, a smaller group of ants moves through the colony's shadowed frontier. Their work protects everything inside. In this subterranean world, rejection does not always mean exile. Sometimes it means being pushed outward into the margins where contamination is contained and the fragile balance of the colony's food supply can survive another day. A paper nest hangs beneath the edge of a wooden beam, its layered surface pale and fibrous like weathered bark. From a distance it appears fragile, almost delicate, yet it houses a society built on constant vigilance. The nest belongs to a colony of social wasps, insects whose reputation for aggression is not simply a matter of temperament, but a reflection of the strict biological rules that hold their society together. Every individual that approaches the narrow entrance must pass a form of chemical inspection, and failure is often answered with immediate violence. Inside the nest, dozens of hexagonal chambers form a tightly packed nursery where developing larvae rest within open cells. Adult workers move constantly across the comb, feeding the brood with chewed fragments of insects captured during hunting flights. Unlike bees, which rely on nectar and pollen, many social wasps are active predators. Workers patrol gardens, forest edges, and open meadows, searching for caterpillars, flies, and other soft-bodied insects that can be dismantled and carried back to the nest as protein-rich meals for the growing larvae. The adults themselves feed mostly on sugars, sipping nectar or sweet plant secretions to fuel their flight muscles. This division of diet creates a functional exchange within the colony. Larvae receive protein to support rapid growth, while adults gain energy from carbohydrates. In return, the larvae release droplets of nutrient-rich liquid that workers consume. Through this cycle, the nest becomes a tightly integrated metabolic system, in which every member depends on the productivity and safety of the whole. Guarding that system begins at the entrance. A returning worker approaching the nest slows as she reaches the outer surface, folding her wings briefly while several other wasps converge around her. Their antennae tap rapidly against her body, sampling the chemical signals embedded in the waxy layer that coats her exoskeleton. These signals are composed of complex hydrocarbons and pheromones that function as a colony signature. Each nest carries its own unique chemical identity, produced by the queen and continuously reinforced through contact among workers. To a human observer, two wasps from neighboring nests may appear indistinguishable. Their bodies share the same narrow waist, the same yellow and black warning stripes, the same transparent wings that shimmer in sunlight. Yet to the guards waiting at the entrance, scent reveals everything. The moment their antennae detect a mismatch in the colony odor, their behavior changes instantly. Intruders rarely escape unnoticed. A wasp carrying the wrong chemical signature may attempt to land on the nest, but the guards respond with sudden aggression. They bite with sharp mandibles and strike repeatedly with their stingers, delivering venom designed not only to paralyze prey, but also to defend the colony. The confrontation unfolds within seconds. An outsider that fails the chemical inspection is pushed away from the nest surface or killed outright, her body falling through the air before reaching the ground below. This defensive system protects the colony from a range of threats. Rival wasps sometimes attempt to invade neighboring nests to steal food or occupy the structure entirely. Parasitic insects may try to deposit eggs inside the brood chambers. Even members of the same species from nearby colonies can become dangerous competitors. By relying on chemical recognition rather than visual appearance, the nest guards maintain a precise boundary between those who belong and those who do not. The tension at the entrance grows stronger during periods of scarcity. In late summer, when insect prey becomes less abundant and environmental conditions shift, social wasp colonies face increasing pressure to maintain enough resources for the developing brood. Workers must hunt more aggressively, traveling greater distances in search of caterpillars or other prey hidden among leaves and bark. Every successful hunt becomes valuable energy stored within the growing larvae. Inside the nest, these pressures sometimes produce decisions that appear harsh, but serve a clear biological purpose. If food supplies decline, workers may begin removing weaker larvae from the brood comb. A larva that grows slowly or receives insufficient food becomes less likely to reach adulthood. Instead of continuing to invest resources in individuals that may not survive, the workers redirect their efforts toward the strongest developing brood. In some cases, the rejected larvae are carried away from the nest entirely. In others, they are consumed by the workers themselves, recycling valuable nutrients back into the colony. The behavior is not random cruelty. It reflects a resource management strategy shaped by evolutionary pressures that reward efficiency and collective survival. A wasp colony, like many social insect societies, functions as a superorganism where the success of the group outweighs the fate of any single individual. Even healthy workers returning from long hunting flights face scrutiny each time they approach the entrance. Exposure to foreign environments can alter their chemical scent. Contact with plant resins, prey insects, or rival colonies may temporarily mask their colony signature. When this happens, the guards respond cautiously, intensifying their antennal inspection before allowing the worker to pass. From the outside, the entrance of the nest resembles a small circular doorway, no wider than a fingertip. Yet within that narrow boundary, a sophisticated security system operates continuously, guided by chemical communication and instinctive aggression. Every returning individual must prove her identity again and again, each encounter reinforcing the invisible borders that protect the colony's fragile interior. The wasps patrolling this threshold do not recognize faces or remember personalities. Their decisions are governed entirely by scent and signal. In a world where survival depends on defending food, brood, and shelter, a single incorrect odor can transform a returning traveler into an enemy within moments. A weathered wooden beam stretches along the edge of a quiet building, its surface marked by small, perfectly round holes that appear almost deliberate in their precision. Each opening leads into a narrow tunnel carved deep within the wood, and inside those tunnels lives a solitary architect whose presence is often overlooked until the soft vibration of wings announces her return. The carpenter bee is among the largest native bees in many temperate landscapes, a dark, heavy-bodied insect whose glossy abdomen reflects sunlight like polished stone. Her flight carries a deep, resonant hum, slower and heavier than the higher buzz of honeybees moving among flowers. Yet behind this imposing presence lies a life shaped by subtle competition and careful negotiation over something surprisingly fragile: the right to remain inside a single tunnel. Carpenter bees do not build wax hives or sprawling underground nests. Instead, they excavate their homes directly into wood. With powerful mandibles, a female chews through softened timber, boring a straight tunnel that may extend several body lengths beneath the surface. The wood dust created by this excavation falls away as fine particles, leaving behind a smooth corridor that becomes both shelter and nursery. Inside this narrow passage, the bee constructs a series of brood chambers, dividing them with partitions made from chewed plant fibers and saliva. Each chamber receives a carefully prepared mixture of pollen and nectar before a single egg is placed inside, sealing the future larva into a private chamber, where it will grow and eventually emerge as an adult. This architecture is efficient, but it also creates a spatial problem. A tunnel can support only a limited number of occupants at one time. Unlike the enormous colonies of ants or honeybees, carpenter bee societies remain small and fluid. A single tunnel may contain only a few adult females sharing the structure, and even this loose arrangement is rarely peaceful. Within the narrow wooden corridor, social hierarchies begin to form, and with them comes a quieter, more personal form of exclusion. At the entrance of the tunnel, a female often positions herself facing outward, her head partially blocking the opening. From this vantage point, she can monitor the surrounding airspace, watching for predators, parasites, or rival bees attempting to enter. Her antennae constantly sample the air, detecting subtle chemical cues drifting from nearby individuals. The position is not merely defensive, it also represents control. The bee holding this place effectively governs access to the nest. In some carpenter bee species, several females may share the same tunnel during the breeding season. Often these individuals are related, daughters that have matured within the same nest, or sisters emerging from neighboring brood chambers. Yet even among relatives, cooperation remains conditional. One female gradually assumes dominance, usually through repeated encounters that establish her physical control over the entrance and interior space. The dominant female spends long periods guarding the opening, while subordinate individuals occupy deeper sections of the tunnel. From the outside, the arrangement appears stable, but the balance can shift quickly. When a subordinate attempts to leave the nest for foraging flights, she must pass the dominant female stationed at the entrance. On her return, the same guardian inspects the approaching bee, sometimes allowing passage and sometimes blocking the way entirely. These confrontations are brief but decisive. If the dominant bee denies access, she pushes forward with her head and thorax, forcing the returning individual away from the entrance. The rejected bee hovers momentarily outside the hole, her wings beating rapidly as she attempts to reposition herself. Occasionally, she makes another attempt to enter, but repeated refusals eventually drive her away from the nest. For the displaced bee, this moment carries serious consequences. A carpenter bee without access to a tunnel loses both shelter and reproductive opportunity. Constructing a new nest requires locating suitable wood, excavating a fresh corridor, and investing large amounts of time and energy into creating brood chambers. In landscapes where appropriate nesting sites are limited, competition for existing tunnels becomes intense. The dominance hierarchy within a shared tunnel also affects reproduction directly. The female controlling the nest entrance often lays the majority of eggs within the brood chambers. Subordinate bees may contribute to nest maintenance or occasionally assist with guarding, but their chances of producing offspring decline significantly. In some cases, they remain within the nest only temporarily, eventually dispersing to search for new nesting sites where they can establish their own tunnels. This dynamic reveals a different dimension of insect rejection compared to the dramatic expulsions seen in large colonies. Instead of thousands of workers forcing individuals from a hive, the carpenter bee's version unfolds through small confrontations in confined spaces. A single bee blocking a hole no wider than a fingertip can determine who remains inside and who must leave. Environmental pressures intensify this competition. Carpenter bees rely on stable wooden structures that remain dry enough to excavate, but soft enough to carve with their mandibles. Old trees, fence posts, and wooden buildings provide these conditions, yet suitable locations are scattered unevenly across the landscape. As more bees search for nesting sites, existing tunnels become valuable real estate. Even within the quiet walls of a wooden beam, a subtle struggle unfolds over access and control. One female guards the entrance while another circles outside, her wings vibrating with restless energy. She may eventually find another piece of wood where she can begin her own excavation, chewing patiently through fibers until a new tunnel forms. But for a brief moment she hovers at the threshold of the old nest, close enough to smell the interior chambers she once occupied. Inside the tunnel, the dominant female remains motionless at the entrance, her body sealing the passage. In the world of carpenter bees, belonging is not guaranteed by cooperation or shared ancestry. Sometimes it is decided simply by who holds the doorway. Along the sunlit edge of a stone wall, where fallen leaves collect in quiet corners and tree roots twist through cracks in the soil, clusters of small red and black insects gather in numbers that can appear almost unnatural. At first glance, the surface seems stained with scattered droplets of color, but as the morning light warms the ground, those droplets begin to move. Hundreds of firebugs shift slowly across the stone and bark, their bodies patterned with bold crimson and dark geometric shapes that resemble tiny warning shields. They belong to a species of true bug that thrives in temperate forests and urban parks alike, often congregating beneath linden trees where fallen seeds and plant debris provide a steady supply of food. Unlike the rigid societies of ants or bees, firebugs do not live in organized colonies with queens, workers, or specialized roles. Each individual is capable of feeding, reproducing, and surviving independently. Yet for much of the year, they behave as though drawn together by an invisible magnet. During cool mornings, or as autumn approaches, firebugs gather into dense aggregations where hundreds of bodies press against one another in layered clusters. These gatherings may form along sunlit tree trunks, at the base of buildings, or beneath loose bark where warmth accumulates. The purpose of these clusters becomes clearer as the air temperature fluctuates through the day. Firebugs are ectothermic animals, meaning their body temperature rises and falls with the environment around them. In cool conditions, their muscles operate slowly, making movement sluggish and flight impossible. By pressing together in large groups, the insects create a small pocket of shared warmth. Each body absorbs sunlight and radiates heat, and when hundreds of insects gather closely, the cluster functions almost like a living thermal blanket. Within this crowded structure, position matters. Individuals buried near the center of the aggregation experience the greatest stability. Surrounded on all sides by other bodies, they benefit from reduced heat loss and protection from wind. Their temperature rises slightly above the surrounding air, allowing their muscles and internal processes to function more efficiently. The insects at the center also gain a degree of safety from predators. Birds, spiders, and small reptiles often hunt firebugs, but reaching the insects hidden deep within a tightly packed cluster requires more effort and risk than capturing those exposed along the edges. Along the outer layer of the group, the conditions are very different. The insects positioned here experience greater temperature fluctuations as cool air moves across their bodies. They also remain fully visible to predators, scanning the ground for movement. In the quiet ecology of a garden or woodland clearing, such differences can shape the survival chances of each individual within the cluster. Yet the firebugs do not organize themselves through cooperation or deliberate sharing of space. Instead, the structure of the group emerges through constant, subtle competition. Each insect attempts to move toward the warmer center, where the benefits are greatest. Bodies shift and climb over one another in slow motion, antennae probing the surfaces of neighboring individuals as they search for stable footholds. The insects that succeed in pushing inward become insulated within the living mass. Those unable to maintain their position gradually slide outward, displaced by stronger or better positioned individuals. The process unfolds continuously, almost imperceptibly, yet its consequences are unmistakable. The interior remains crowded and warm, while the edges constantly refill with new occupants forced outward by pressure from behind. To an observer watching from above, the cluster appears stable, but within it, every insect is adjusting its position. The physics of crowding shapes the outcome. Bodies press together, shifting slightly with each movement, until some individuals inevitably lose their grip on the interior layers and emerge along the exposed surface. Predators quickly learn where to focus their attention. A small bird landing nearby may peck repeatedly at the outer insects, snatching individuals from the cluster before they can escape. Firebugs possess chemical defenses that release a sharp odor when disturbed, a deterrent that discourages some predators. Yet the protection is not perfect, and individuals on the margins remain vulnerable. The difference between center and edge becomes even more important as temperatures drop during late autumn. Firebugs often gather in enormous groups to prepare for winter, seeking sheltered crevices where they can survive months of cold in a state of reduced activity. Within these overwintering clusters, the insects conserve energy by limiting movement and sharing warmth with their neighbors. Those buried deep inside the aggregation benefit from the most stable conditions, while those forced to the outer layers face greater exposure to cold air. In this environment, rejection does not occur through direct aggression or deliberate expulsion. No individual insect makes a conscious decision about who belongs inside the cluster. Instead, the outcome emerges from the relentless mechanics of crowd survival. Stronger individuals, or those that arrive earlier, secure positions closer to the center. Others, unable to compete effectively for space, remain along the edges where the protective advantages of the group diminish. Across the surface of the cluster, the insects continue to shift slowly, each one seeking warmth and security among the bodies of its neighbors. From a distance, the group resembles a single organism breathing quietly in the sunlight. Yet hidden within that mass is a subtle hierarchy determined not by cooperation or command, but by the simple realities of heat, pressure, and access to space. In the world of firebugs, belonging to the group offers powerful advantages, but remaining within its protective center is never guaranteed. Sometimes survival depends not on strength or intelligence, but simply on whether an individual can hold its place in the shifting geometry of the crowd. In the heat of a tropical afternoon, a cotton field lies quiet beneath the open sky, its dry plants standing in pale rows that rustle faintly when the wind moves through them. Scattered across the cracked soil and tangled stems are clusters of insects so brightly colored they almost seem painted against the muted landscape. Their bodies glow with deep crimson and black, a warning pattern that catches the eye long before the insects themselves begin to move. These are red cotton bugs, members of a group of true bugs that gather in conspicuous numbers wherever cotton plants or related seed-bearing plants grow. Their presence transforms the stillness of the field into something more dynamic, a slow-moving congregation of hundreds of individuals feeding, resting, and pressing against one another in crowded clusters. The insects are drawn to cotton, not for the fibers humans prize, but for the seeds hidden inside the dried pods. Using slender, piercing mouthparts, each bug inserts its feeding tube through the plant tissue and extracts nutrient-rich fluids from the seeds within. These fluids provide the energy needed for growth, reproduction, and the long hours spent under intense sunlight. A single insect feeding alone could survive on these resources, yet red cotton bugs rarely live solitary lives. Instead, they gather in dense aggregations that cover seed pods, stems, and the surrounding ground like shifting patches of color. At first glance, these gatherings appear cooperative. Dozens or even hundreds of insects press together across the surfaces of cotton pods, their legs and antennae constantly touching as they reposition themselves in slow motion. Yet the structure of the cluster is not guided by social coordination. Unlike ants or bees, red cotton bugs do not belong to organized colonies with leaders or workers assigned to specific duties. Each individual acts independently, guided by instinct and environmental cues. What emerges from this independence is a subtle contest for space and resources. The cotton pod itself becomes the center of this contest. Seeds packed inside the dry casing represent concentrated nutrition, and insects feeding directly on these pods gain access to the most reliable food supply in the environment. Those that arrive early often secure positions along the cracks and seams of the pod, where their mouthparts can reach the seed tissue easily. As more bugs gather, the available feeding sites become crowded, bodies pressed together across the pod's surface, each insect attempting to maintain its position near the richest source of nutrients. From above, the scene resembles a slowly shifting mosaic of red and black forms layered across the plant. But inside the cluster, constant movement determines which individuals remain in the best positions. Antennae sweep across neighboring bodies, legs brace against the curved surfaces of the pod, and insects climb over one another in patient attempts to hold their place. Those with stronger footing or better timing manage to remain near the feeding points where the seeds are accessible. Others gradually lose their position. When an insect slips or is nudged aside by the pressure of surrounding bodies, it may find itself pushed outward along the edge of the cluster. The displacement is rarely dramatic. There are no violent confrontations or obvious acts of aggression. Instead, the movement happens slowly as individuals compete for stable footing. Over time, the outer insects drift farther from the seed openings where feeding is possible. Along the margins of the group, the environment becomes less forgiving. Bugs positioned on exposed stems or leaves cannot always reach the seed tissues that sustain those closer to the pod. Without steady access to nutrients, they must either search for another feeding site or remain near the cluster, hoping for an opportunity to move inward again. The crowded arrangement makes such opportunities rare. Predators also notice these edges. Small birds moving through the cotton field often scan the ground and plant stems for movement. The bright coloration of the red cotton bug functions as a warning signal, advertising chemical defenses that make the insects distasteful to many predators. Yet the protection is not absolute. A hungry bird may still seize an exposed individual, especially when that insect stands apart from the dense mass of the cluster. The insects at the center benefit from a different set of conditions. Surrounded by dozens of neighbors, they remain partially shielded from direct attack. Their bodies absorb sunlight and radiate warmth collectively, creating a slightly more stable microclimate within the group. In the intense midday heat of the cotton field, such thermal buffering allows the insects to maintain steady activity without overheating as quickly as individuals exposed directly to the open air. As the day progresses, the cluster shifts slowly across the surface of the plant, responding to subtle changes in sunlight and temperature. Individuals continuously probe for better positions, climbing over one another with patient determination. A few may succeed in moving from the outer edge toward the feeding center, while others slide outward under the pressure of the crowd. What emerges from this restless movement is a quiet hierarchy shaped not by authority or cooperation, but by the physics of crowding and access to food. The insects that maintain their place near the seed pods feed steadily and remain protected within the cluster. Those displaced to the margins face a harsher reality where food becomes scarce and predators more easily reach them. In the ecology of the cotton field, rejection does not always appear as a dramatic act of expulsion. Sometimes it unfolds through simple displacement, a slow push outward that removes an individual from the shared advantages of the group. Within the shifting crowd of red cotton bugs, survival depends on the ability to hold a position where warmth, food, and safety overlap. For the insects drifting along the edges of the cluster, losing that position can quietly become the difference between persistence and disappearance beneath the vast, sunlit rows of cotton plants. On a warm summer afternoon, the broad leaf of a flowering plant becomes the center of a quiet but fragile world. Sunlight filters through the canopy above, illuminating a small cluster of pale eggs arranged in precise geometric rows along the leaf's underside. Standing over them is a shieldbug, her body shaped like a tiny armored shield, mottled green and bronze in a pattern that mirrors the colors of surrounding foliage. She remains motionless except for the slow movement of her antennae, which sweep gently through the air, sampling faint chemical traces drifting across the leaf surface. To an observer passing by, the insect may appear idle, but in reality, she is performing one of the most demanding forms of insect care, guarding her young. Shieldbugs belong to a large family of insects commonly known as stink bugs, famous for the pungent defensive chemicals they release when disturbed. Many species scatter their eggs across leaves and abandon them soon after laying, leaving the developing offspring to survive on their own. Yet in certain shieldbug species, maternal care has evolved into a complex defensive behavior. The female remains near her eggs for days or even weeks, positioning herself over the cluster like a living shield. Her role is simple but critical. She protects the vulnerable brood from predators and parasites that patrol the plant world with relentless efficiency. The dangers surrounding these eggs are constant. Tiny parasitic wasps drift through the vegetation, searching for insect eggs in which to lay their own. If a wasp succeeds in piercing the shell of a shieldbug egg, the developing larva inside will be replaced by the wasp's offspring, which consumes the egg's contents before emerging as an adult parasite. Predatory beetles and ants present another threat, capable of dismantling an unguarded egg cluster in minutes. For the shieldbug mother, remaining with the brood dramatically increases the chances that at least some of her offspring will survive these hazards. Her defensive strategy relies on posture, persistence, and chemical deterrence. When a potential predator approaches, the shieldbug spreads her legs and flattens her body against the leaf, covering the eggs as completely as possible. If the intruder persists, she may lash out with sudden movements, striking with her body or releasing sharp bursts of odor from specialized scent glands. The chemicals she produces contain compounds that many predators find unpleasant or irritating, an invisible barrier that helps discourage further attack. Yet protection is not distributed evenly among the developing offspring beneath her. The eggs arranged closest to the center of the cluster lie directly beneath the mother's body, where her shielding posture offers the greatest defense. Those positioned along the edges remain more exposed, vulnerable to predators capable of approaching from angles beyond her reach. The geometry of the egg mass itself therefore creates differences in safety long before the young even hatch. When the eggs finally open, small nymphs emerge and gather tightly beneath the shelter of the adult female. At this stage they are flightless and slow-moving, dependent on proximity to their siblings and their mother for protection. Many shieldbug species release aggregation pheromones that encourage the young to remain clustered together. These chemical signals function as a form of coordination, ensuring that the group maintains a compact shape that the mother can defend effectively. But the environment around them does not remain calm. Parasites may still attempt to reach the developing nymphs, and predators continue to search the foliage. As pressure increases, the mother's capacity to protect every individual becomes limited by simple physical reality. A shieldbug can shield only the area her body can cover, and when attackers approach from multiple directions, her defensive posture inevitably prioritizes some offspring over others. Weak or parasitized nymphs often drift toward the edges of the cluster where they become more exposed. Some may fail to keep pace when the group shifts position across the leaf. Others may simply occupy a less protected location when a predator arrives. In these moments, the protective circle around the brood tightens instinctively around the healthiest and most centrally positioned individuals. This pattern is not the result of deliberate choice. Insects do not weigh moral decisions about fairness or sacrifice. Instead, the behavior reflects evolutionary pressures that reward strategies maximizing the number of surviving offspring. By defending the densest part of the brood, the shieldbug increases the probability that the strongest individuals will reach maturity, even if others are lost along the margins. Occasionally, the young themselves contribute to this fragile defense system. Newly hatched nymphs may release alarm chemicals when disturbed, triggering synchronized movements within the group. The cluster shifts, compressing inward as individuals press closer together beneath the mother's body. Such coordination improves survival odds, but cannot eliminate the uneven risks faced by individuals positioned farther from the center. Across the leaf surface, the drama unfolds quietly. A parasitic wasp lands nearby, probing the air with delicate antennae. The shieldbug senses the disturbance and stiffens, lowering her body protectively over the eggs and nymphs beneath her. The wasp approaches cautiously, searching for an opening along the cluster's edge. In the insect world, even acts of care operate within strict biological limits. The shieldbug mother guards her brood with unwavering persistence, yet the circle of protection she creates has boundaries defined by the size of her body and the geometry of the cluster beneath it. Within that circle, some offspring remain sheltered while others stand closer to danger. Survival here is not evenly distributed. It follows the simple rule that nature has applied to countless species across millions of years. Resources and protection flow first to the individuals most likely to endure. High in the mountains of central Mexico, where fir forests cloak the slopes in dark green shadows, and cool mist drifts slowly between the trunks. The branches of certain trees begin to carry an unusual weight each winter. At first, the clusters appear like dead leaves gathered by the wind, hanging thickly along the limbs. Yet when sunlight reaches them and the air warms slightly, the forest suddenly trembles with movement. Wings unfold by the thousands, revealing a living mosaic of orange and black patterns that shimmer against the grey bark. These are monarch butterflies, migrants that have traveled astonishing distances across North America to reach this narrow refuge where they will endure the coldest months of the year. The journey that brings them here is one of the most remarkable migrations in the insect world. Monarchs born in late summer begin a southward flight that can stretch across entire continents. Unlike birds or mammals that complete the round trip within a single lifetime, the monarch migration spans multiple generations. Butterflies that emerge in spring begin moving northward, laying eggs along the way before dying. Their offspring continue the expansion through summer. Then, as daylight shortens and temperatures fall, a special generation emerges with a different biological clock. These late-season monarchs delay reproduction and enter a state known as reproductive diapause, conserving energy for migration rather than immediate breeding. Their fat reserves grow thicker, and their wings carry them steadily southward over mountains, rivers, cities, and plains. Guided by a combination of internal circadian rhythms and the position of the sun, they navigate toward a handful of high-elevation forests that provide the precise environmental conditions required for winter survival. When the butterflies arrive, the forest becomes a refuge not because it is warm, but because it is stable. The tall oyamel fir trees create a canopy that buffers the harshest fluctuations of temperature and wind. Here, monarchs gather in immense clusters that drape from branches like living curtains. Tens of thousands may cling together on a single limb, their wings overlapping in layered folds that reduce exposure to cold air. Within these clusters, the physical arrangement of bodies becomes a matter of survival. Monarch butterflies are ectothermic animals, dependent on environmental warmth to maintain the muscle activity required for flight. During winter nights in the mountain forests, temperatures can drop close to freezing. A solitary butterfly exposed to such conditions would quickly lose heat and become immobilized, eventually succumbing to the cold. By clustering together in dense formations, monarchs create a shared microclimate that slows heat loss and stabilizes their body temperatures. The butterflies near the center of a cluster experience the most favorable conditions. Surrounded on all sides by neighboring wings, they are protected from wind and sudden temperature shifts. Moisture carried by drifting fog condenses less heavily on their bodies, and predators have difficulty reaching them through the dense layers of insects. Those positioned along the outer surfaces live in a different world. The butterflies on the edges of the cluster are the first to face the mountain's winter weather. Cold air flows freely across their wings, and droplets of moisture accumulate along the delicate scales that give the wings their vivid color. If temperatures drop too far, ice crystals can form on the exposed surfaces, weighing down the insects and damaging the fragile structures needed for flight. Even small differences in position can determine whether a butterfly survives the night. The insects respond by constantly adjusting their places within the cluster. As the day warms slightly, some individuals crawl slowly across the mass of wings, attempting to move toward the interior where conditions are more stable. Others are forced outward as the shifting structure of the group redistributes space. From a distance, the cluster appears static, but at close range, the entire formation breathes with subtle motion. Wings flex and reposition, antennae probe the air, and bodies press together in a slow negotiation for shelter. Predators watch these edges carefully. Black-headed grosbeaks and other insect-eating birds occasionally arrive in the forest during winter, drawn by the abundance of butterflies. While monarchs possess chemical defenses derived from the milkweed plants they consumed as caterpillars, these toxins do not deter every predator. Birds often learn to avoid the most toxic tissues while feeding selectively on the butterflies themselves. The outer layer of the cluster becomes the most accessible target. A bird landing on the branch can pluck individuals from the exposed surface without disturbing the dense interior mass. The butterflies deeper within the cluster remain protected by sheer numbers and the physical barrier created by overlapping wings. Weather can produce similar sorting effects. During cold storms, clusters sometimes break apart under the combined weight of moisture and wind. Butterflies falling from the branches may land on the forest floor, where temperatures remain colder and predators more active. Many of these displaced individuals never return to the safety of the cluster above. The structure of the group therefore creates an invisible hierarchy determined by position. Butterflies that secure places within the inner layers benefit from the warmth and protection created by thousands of neighboring bodies. Those forced to remain along the margins face greater exposure to cold, predators, and exhaustion. Yet there is no leader deciding who belongs where. The arrangement emerges naturally from the movement of the insects themselves, each individual seeking a slightly better position within the living mass. Over time, this constant adjustment produces a pattern where some individuals remain sheltered, while others endure the harsher edges of winter. When spring sunlight finally begins to warm the forest, the clusters dissolve into clouds of orange wings lifting from the branches. Survivors of the winter migration drift southward and northward again, beginning the long cycle of generations that will eventually send their descendants across the continent once more. Within the quiet fir forests, the winter gathering of monarch butterflies reveals a simple truth about survival in crowded systems. Even in a group numbering in the millions, safety is unevenly distributed. The center holds warmth and protection, while the edges carry the risk. And in the fragile architecture of those clusters, a butterfly's position can quietly decide whether it will fly again when spring returns. As evening settles over a quiet wetland, the air above the water begins to shift with a faint, restless motion. The last light of day lingers along the horizon, while shadows deepen among reeds and grasses. Insects rise from the vegetation in delicate spirals, drawn upward by subtle changes in temperature and light. Among them are mosquitoes, their slender bodies nearly invisible against the dim sky. For most of the day, they have remained hidden in cool resting sites beneath leaves and stems, conserving energy in the heat. Now, as the air cools and the wind softens, the conditions that shape one of the most important moments in their life cycle begin to form. Above a patch of still water or an open clearing in the vegetation, a loose cloud of mosquitoes gathers into a swarm. At first, the movement appears chaotic, hundreds of insects drifting through the air in erratic loops and arcs. Yet the swarm quickly organizes around invisible reference points in the landscape. Mosquitoes often form these gatherings above visual markers, such as the tip of a reed, a dark patch of soil, or the corner of a pathway. These markers provide spatial cues that help the insects maintain position within the group as they hover several body lengths above the ground. The swarm is composed almost entirely of males. Unlike females, male mosquitoes do not feed on blood. Their diet consists of nectar and plant sugars, which provide the energy needed for flight. Their role in the swarm is singular. They are waiting for females to arrive. The males hover in place, beating their wings at high frequency, their bodies rising and falling through narrow vertical columns of air. The buzzing sound produced by these wing beats forms a complex acoustic environment where each mosquito's flight creates vibrations that nearby individuals can detect. Male mosquitoes possess one of the most sensitive hearing systems among insects. Their antennae are feathery structures lined with fine hairs that respond to subtle changes in air movement. At the base of each antenna lies a specialized organ known as Johnston's organ, capable of detecting the precise frequency of wing beats produced by other mosquitoes. This sensory adaptation allows males to identify approaching females even when the insects themselves remain nearly invisible in the fading light. When a female enters the swarm, the sound of her wing beats triggers immediate reactions. Her flight tone differs slightly from that of the males, producing a frequency pattern that stands out within the cloud of buzzing wings. Several males may attempt to intercept her, adjusting their flight paths in rapid spirals as they attempt to align their movements with hers. Within this airborne gathering, position matters greatly. The center of the swarm contains the highest density of males and the greatest likelihood of encountering an incoming female. Individuals that maintain stable positions near this core occupy the most favorable location for reproductive success. The outer layers of the swarm, by contrast, experience constant turbulence as insects enter and exit the formation. Males drifting along these edges often struggle to maintain the same opportunities for contact. The swarm therefore becomes a subtle arena of competition. Each male attempts to hold a position within the shifting cloud, adjusting his flight constantly to remain near the center. Stronger flyers, or those that arrive early, may secure stable positions close to the swarm's core. Others, less agile or slightly delayed in their timing, find themselves pushed outward by the collective motion of surrounding insects. This displacement rarely appears dramatic. No mosquito deliberately drives another away from the swarm. Instead, the pattern emerges from the simple physics of flight. Bodies moving in close proximity generate small air currents that nudge neighboring insects slightly aside. Over time, these repeated adjustments push some individuals toward the margins, where maintaining position becomes increasingly difficult. When a female enters the swarm, these differences become decisive. Males near the center are more likely to intercept her flight path quickly, forming brief mating pairs that spiral downward together before separating again. Those forced to the edges may detect her presence through sound, but by the time they adjust their course, another male closer to the core has already reached her. Species recognition adds another layer to this selective process. Female mosquitoes produce wing beat frequencies that vary subtly between species. Male antennae and auditory organs are tuned to detect the specific acoustic signatures of females from their own species. If a male responds to the wrong signal or fails to synchronize his flight pattern correctly, the opportunity vanishes as quickly as it appeared. Timing plays an equally critical role. Swarms often form only during narrow windows of dusk or dawn when temperature, light levels, and wind conditions align. A male that arrives too early may expend energy hovering in an empty space. One that arrives too late may encounter a swarm already thinning as successful pairs depart and darkness deepens. Predators exploit these gatherings as well. Swallows, bats, and dragonflies sometimes patrol the airspace around mosquito swarms, capturing insects that drift too far from the protective density of the group. Individuals along the outer edges are especially vulnerable, their isolated flight paths easier for a predator to track. The result is a quiet sorting process within the swarm. A few males manage to remain near the core long enough to encounter a female and complete the brief mating flight that ensures their genetic contribution to the next generation. Many others hover along the margins, circling through the fading light as the swarm gradually disperses. From a distance, the cloud dissolves as night settles across the wetland. The air grows still, and the insects scatter back into the vegetation. Yet the outcome of that brief gathering will echo through the next generation of mosquitoes. In a swarm where no individual commands the group, success depends on timing, sensory precision, and the ability to hold position within a constantly shifting formation. Those that fail to secure that place remain part of the swarm in motion, but excluded from the single purpose that brought them there. In the dim interior of a fallen log, deep within a tropical forest, the air holds a quiet warmth that rarely reaches the open ground outside. The wood has begun to soften with age and moisture, forming a network of cavities and sheltered pockets where insects gather in the darkness. Among the most conspicuous residents of these hidden chambers are Madagascar hissing cockroaches, large, glossy-bodied insects that move slowly across the decaying wood. Their armor-like exoskeleton reflects faint glints of light filtering through cracks in the bark, and their long antennae sweep constantly through the air, reading the invisible chemical landscape around them. Unlike many of their smaller relatives that scatter quickly when disturbed, these cockroaches often remain in loose groups within sheltered spaces. A single hollow log may contain dozens of individuals resting side by side along the inner surfaces of the wood. The cluster appears calm at first glance, yet beneath that stillness lies a subtle structure shaped by competition, communication, and the constant negotiation of space. Madagascar hissing cockroaches belong to a small group of insects capable of producing sound not through wings, but through the rapid expulsion of air from specialized openings along their bodies. These openings, known as spiracles, normally function as part of the insect respiratory system, allowing oxygen to reach internal tissues. When the cockroach forces air through them suddenly, the result is a sharp, unmistakable hiss. The sound serves several purposes, including defense against predators, communication between individuals, and signals exchanged during conflicts over territory or mates. Within the crowded shelter of a rotting log, such signals become part of a complex social landscape. The cockroaches share the same refuge because it offers protection from predators and stabilizes temperature and humidity in a forest environment that changes rapidly between day and night. The thick wood above them buffers the extremes of heat and rainfall while maintaining the moist conditions these insects require to avoid dehydration. Yet this shared shelter also concentrates individuals into close proximity, and where bodies gather, hierarchy begins to form. Among adult males, dominance is established through repeated confrontations. When two males encounter each other along the same section of wood, they often raise their bodies and push forward with the front of their heads. The contact may escalate into brief shoving matches, where each insect attempts to displace the other from the surface. During these encounters, the cockroaches produce bursts of hissing that resonate through the hollow log, vibrations that carry through the wood and signal the intensity of the challenge. The contests rarely produce serious injury, yet their outcome determines which individuals control the most favorable positions within the shelter. A dominant male often secures areas near the entrance of the cavity where airflow is stronger and food sources are easier to reach. These locations also provide better access to passing females that move through the habitat in search of suitable places to feed or rest. Subordinate males experience the environment differently. After repeated defeats, they gradually retreat toward the deeper recesses of the log or toward exposed edges where conditions are less stable. The difference may appear small to an outside observer, but within the confined world of the shelter, these shifts carry significant consequences. Areas closer to the entrance allow easier access to fresh plant material and decaying organic matter that cockroaches consume as omnivorous scavengers. They also place males in direct proximity to females moving through the environment. Those forced into marginal positions must travel farther to locate food and encounter fewer opportunities to mate. The hierarchy created through physical contests therefore extends beyond simple territory. It shapes the reproductive success of the individuals within the group. Crowding can intensify these pressures. When many cockroaches share a limited shelter, the most protected surfaces quickly become occupied by dominant individuals. Others remain along the edges where the log opens to the outside environment. These margins expose them to shifting humidity and temperature, as well as to predators such as birds, reptiles, and small mammals that probe the decaying wood for prey. Even the act of feeding reflects this layered structure. Cockroaches moving across a patch of decaying fruit or plant material often jostle gently for position, antennae touching, as they test the presence of neighbors. Dominant individuals may push others aside through subtle body movements, securing access to the richest portions of the food source. Subordinates frequently withdraw, rather than escalate the conflict, drifting outward toward less contested fragments. Yet the group never dissolves entirely. The benefits of shared shelter remain too significant. Living together allows these insects to maintain favorable humidity levels through the collective presence of their bodies, and the cluster provides a degree of protection against predators that might hesitate to attack a dense group of large insects capable of producing sudden defensive hisses. In the quiet darkness of the log, dozens of cockroaches remain gathered within the same narrow refuge, each responding to the chemical cues and vibrations of those around them. Some occupy the best surfaces, close to food and potential mates. Others linger along the edges where conditions are less predictable. The pattern echoes through many corners of the insect world. Whether in the rigid societies of ants, the swarming clouds of mosquitoes, or the crowded shelters of cockroaches, belonging rarely guarantees equal access to safety or opportunity. Even in groups that appear peaceful from the outside, subtle hierarchies shape who thrives and who is gradually pushed toward the margins. Within this dim wooden chamber, the hissing cockroaches continue their slow movements across the bark and soil, each insect adjusting its position in response to the pressures of the group. The shelter holds them together, but the silent negotiations within it reveal a simple biological truth. In crowded worlds, survival often depends not only on being part of the group, but on where within that group one manages to stand.